Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mr. Within's Gift. Very simply, the intention of this channel was to, in some sense, provide me with a digital notepad where I am recording certain ways, certain perspectives I have. And the reason I chose the title of today's episode, Transcending Karmic Retribution, because karma, the concept when I first understood it was, or when it first became real for me, it was more than just a cause and effect thing. You know, for most people nowadays, especially in Western culture, they think karma is just the effect of something, you know. But in some sense, karma is how the presence of the universe is being expressed in every moment. Now, we got to realize that every person is starting at a different position on the mountain, with different resources, different availabilities, different points of attention. Karma becomes significant when the human beings are, in some sense, how can I say it to you? It's like, if you know who Charles Bukowski is, this author, there was a very awkward interview where in that interview, you know, they ask him about his fear of death or something like that, and he says he's not afraid because life for him, he was an old man when this interview was happening, and he said life begins to repeat itself. And for me, that statement was like, I respect Charles Bukowski's writing because it was real, you know. He's one of my authors because he did not sugarcoat reality in his writing. Pretty much after some point in life, there comes a certain cyclical pattern. You begin to notice cycles. Karma is when the human being does an action, expects a certain outcome. When that outcome doesn't, in some sense, come to fruition, it's as if rotten ideas of like karmic problems come in. You know, one can say that karma is based on, let us say, traditionally, not just the karma of the person, but the karma of the whole space of existence occurring. As if, for example, the karma of like a virus in your system is like, you know, it gets destroyed by antibiotics. At the same time, it has an influence on you, and in some sense, the interconnectivity of life. There's a relationship, there's an interconnected relationship in regards to natural beings remembering themselves out of their unnatural abstract layering over the world. For me, karma, I remember explaining it once like this, that, you know, in Buddhism they consider it as a wheel, and I took my own playful glance at this idea, and I came to the, like, I just, in one of my talks, I just said it, where I said everything in the wheel of karma spins, but the center doesn't. The center of the wheel of karma doesn't spin. And what I mean by that is that there comes a moment in cyclical existence where there comes the curiosity for self-awareness, to know, to become aware more than itself. So in some sense, there are many levels of enlightenment based on how the attention of the being moves and evolves. there is a sort of freedom from, in some sense, dualistic existence through the realization that it is the activity that colors meaning. And in some sense, the universe, prior to us giving it values of good and bad, is simply it is a presence of changing design, you know. Let's take it that way. Just a second, guys. I'm putting on a sweater. Leonardo da Vinci has this very nice quote. He says, to develop a complete mind, study the science of art. Study the art of science. Learn to see, realize everything connects to everything else. You know, I wasn't there with Da Vinci, like, to know, like, you know, if he actually said this, but this quote is ascribed to him, and it fits the context that Da Vinci was a polymath. A polymath pretty much means a person who has found a high level of intelligence which they can apply to many different fields, you know. So what that means is a true professor of any field of study any expert on anything will have attained a certain direct experience of the truth of that idea. And then their opinions are based on that. So in some sense, let's say it like this. Before we talk about karma, we got to talk about the individual. Before we talk about the individual, we got to talk about the awareness that is allowing there to even be the question of an individual. So what I mean by that is that there is a part of, let's say, karmic results is based on how you are seeing things, you know, and a part of it is based on what you are not seeing. So once these two areas are covered, there comes a sense of stillness, of observance. And observance is very crucial. Observance is something they don't teach in schools, but they're always asking you for it. You know, when the teacher says, pay attention, kid, you know, this is your future, kid, pay attention, you know. In that moment, it's as if from just the regular way that human being is living, its attention is required through a conscious effort to see. For me, knowledge is interesting. Like all the stuff that I'm talking about, and I can even talk about, it did not come from a certain organized planning of the future of what truth would mean to me. Like it wasn't something like that. It was in some sense a raw, I don't want to say curiosity, but an inspiration to take all the unknown energy in my life and to know it. So what that means is pretty much like, let me tell you, there's different levels of problems. And karma is considered when there is a disharmony of a mental reality, of a subjective reality with an objective reality. In your mind, you have different values and you feel the universe should behave differently to you, but externally it's behaving something else. This often happens when people, in some sense, do not confront life's experiences. So here's the hint of success I find, you know, like this is how I feel I should explain it in this moment. That it requires an authentic inspiration to direct your attention to a sense of discovery, a sense of diving deep into, you know, the depths of wisdom, and in some sense extracting the value of it. For me, sometimes when I read ancient books, or not just ancient books, like when I read how certain ancient philosophers were living and thinking, for me it was like, it's very awesome. Every person is their own riddle of how they need to reverse engineer out of all their assumptions and prejudices and biases of what the world is into a neutrality where there is no, it's as if like there's some questions you answer by just giving an answer, and there's some questions where you wonder why the questions is there. As you reverse engineer, you realize the question never existed, because the viewpoint prior to the problem existing did not have the problem. So this is the important thing, that your attention is in some sense the purity of your soul. Because it's like, for me, I was wondering, okay, let me see, what's like a formless intelligence, a formless energetic intelligence of some sort. And I was like, okay, so what are some forces that are influencing me as a being? And I was like, okay, let me acknowledge science, but not limited to just the scientific framework of seeing things. So what I mean by that is, I noticed that there's, for example, gravity. Yeah, you drop an object, you realize it falls, you know. For me, I think the concept of gravity was evident to many human beings, but there was no conceptualization of it. And Newton found a way of not only conceptualize it in just like, you know, normal language, but also in mathematical language. The mind begins to have a relationship with itself, where it begins to look at itself in one way like a tree's branches, and in another way like the soil. And one can say at that point it is unknown, but we know that the tree has roots in the soil. So what I'm saying in regards to, just, this is Mr. Within's personal opinion on just the truth of existence. You know, I'm just giving it, you know, very, you know, casual, you know, opinion on the truth of everything. You know? And so, truth for me in this context would be that the roots of our reality are within greater dimensions, where as long as people are branching their approach to this truth, they are not seeing the unity of it. So let me tell you, the task of an enlightened voice is, depression is an emotional opinion, because you don't know what the future holds, and if you're too depressed, you're kind of like not wanting to confront the future. So the importance of direct confrontation means that the mind has to be active and constantly have certain activities where it, in some sense, breathes life into its interpretation of meaning. I have learned from my spontaneity as much as from my organization. I have learned from the chaos as much as I have learned from the order. And for most of my life, I was avoiding chaos, and I was avoiding, in some sense, complex orders. So what I mean by that is that I was avoiding my responsibilities in civilization as a human being to the whole world, and I was at the same time avoiding the truth behind my eyes that I always was. Dear listeners, I'm a person who, I wasn't always thinking this deeply, but certain experiences in life showed me the importance of looking beyond the surface. And beyond the surface means that many human beings never meet one another, actually. So many human beings are just simulating realities of momentary agreement, where as there is an indirect assumption of peace, even though violence may directly happen, it is indirectly being fading out into the intentions of a global society, a global community, where all the human beings on this rock are like, this world is too big for us to, uh, um, in some sense, break. So we are, history is a story of endless contributions until either foolishness drowns us or hope resurrects us. Many human beings function through stories. Karma is what happens to a character in a story. Mr. Within is saying, wonder how the character is there. You'll notice the character will constantly go on living through different stories until one day it asks, who am I? And it breaks itself. You know, that's what happened. You know, it either happens through something pushing you in life to become authentically, not like a curious cat, but like a curious explorer of life that is not trying to violently manipulate it, but you want to see what's here, you know. And so many human beings, they don't become closed-minded, they just become, their minds open up slowly because they're waiting for permission to imagine a greatness beyond them. And so sometimes that permission will never come from outside of you because people outside of you never truly see you. You know, many times where I've gotten upset, angry at other people, like when I was younger, this would happen. I would just get so frustrated over tiny little things in communication not occurring properly. So in some sense, what I mean by that is that I began detaching from my emotions by realizing my true sense of being is not dependent on my emotional self or my thought-based sense of self. It is any separate aspect of me is dependent on the whole thing. So this is what I realized. A part of the system is dependent on the whole system, and in a sense, it is the whole system. Do you see? We require, like, humanity's survival must shift from a sort of we regret what we've done, at the same time we don't, because the outcome, even though it seems tragic, will become a comedy of abundance. I'm speaking at in a way where I want you to now hear Beethoven's last words on his deathbed, where he said, "Applaud, my friends, the comedy is over." He meant life was ended off, at least, or at least, let's say, as pure awareness exits the simulated values of the world it believes. Your biological eyes may close, but the attributeless nature of an instantaneous self-awareness of sorts, or at that point your sense of self, it's like you realize you're not your thoughts, you realize you're not your emotions. So after some time of being distant from instantly reacting aggressively to certain situations that occur, the person finds peace. The person finds peace beyond the pieces of itself. It has in some sense fragmented all over its memory. That means, this is ridiculous, but I've been in certain situations where literally something's happened, and in my mind, behind my eyes, I was also visiting a memory that resembled that incident. So in life, let us consider that you are a being, a living intelligence that experiences life one moment at a time, you know? And so the oneness of this moment is either you are experiencing infinitely separate moments, or all these separate moments are actually one grand moment. And so the grandest moment of them all is where the archetype of supremacy and allowance becomes activated in the mind of the being, where the person gets rid of their ego to, in some sense, forget themselves. And as they forget themselves, they are in a new a moment where they can redefine themselves. It is an ability to realize who you were in your past has nothing to do with who you will be in the future, when your decision is based in the present moment. And I say in because scientifically I got to speak about the world as if it's a container, but mystically I got to speak about it as if it's like, in some sense, a multi-dimensional void that is governed by one supreme unified intelligence. Like there's many different kinds of people, but truth does not need to lie. That means, in honesty, the word enlightenment means accepting what is happening. And as you do, the ego finds no reason to exist. It in some sense fades itself, so it learns from the soul of the being. So pretty much, this is going to be ridiculous, the statement, but I'm going to say it. Pretty much your mind learns from your soul, but because the concept of a soul is a concept for the mind, the experience of the soul is nothing that can be spoken about. It is as mysterious as Lao Tzu's Tao, you know. There's this very interesting story. These two monks in a Zen to a nearby river to wash them, to wash their lunch containers. And so these two, in some sense, let's say in their 30s kind of Zen, monks, they go by the river and they begin cleaning. They begin washing these bowls of, food after they've ate, and in some sense what happens is that one of them suddenly notices a scorpion has taken a wrong turn like a lost tourist and has gone into the water and is drowning. And so one of the friends sees the scorpion drowning and instantly takes the bowl of food and picks up the scorpion, in some sense saves the scorpion's life, but in the process of doing so gets stung by the scorpion. The friend is there watching. The friend is stunned. His monk buddy just got, stung by a scorpion. And so he doesn't say anything, but he's alarmed because he sees, the monk that got stung by the scorpion just it smiles and goes to pick up the bowl again to deal with it. And as the monk is trying to release the scorpion, because the scorpion can't get out of the bowl, as it's like kind of letting it go on the ground, the scorpion stings this monk again. And the friend can't take it anymore. The friend's like, he looks at his, the monk that got stung, and he says, "My friend, why do you keep saving the scorpion when you know its nature is to sting?" And this is where the moral of the story is in the answer this, monk that got stung twice gives. He looks at his friend and he says, "My friend, because to save that scorpion is my nature. Just like that scorpion who just, whether it likes it or not, it stings once it's alarmed. so do human beings have a true nature, where they are unconsciously always abiding by, but consciously so fragmented, experience many moments in the same time. Now, some of the experiences, especially in certain advanced yogic states of mind or certain psychedelic positions, in regards to shamanism and Native American spirituality, one comes into a certain state, and some people call it a trance state, where in this state, you you become the glory of a future that is grateful. That is the greatest victory. That our future children look back at us and they're like, wow, they did things that made our life easier, and so shall we do the same for future generations. So before I end this talk, I'm going to just wrap up the concept of karma. Karma is an acceptance of what is prior to truly seeking to comprehend what isness, or what is how it is being, you know? The karma concept of karma is also very interesting because it's spoken about in certain traditions as if there are certain lords of karma. What that means is the lords of karma are the administrators of this dimension through a certain greater dimensional ability, where it seems that we're being watched over by not ancient books that say so, but because just like how we see an ant, and that ant cannot contemplate, let's say, Albert Einstein's E equals mc squared, we have a certain dimensional limitation. That means our eyes have opened and truth has become accessible. But what we do with truth once we see it will take us to a position where we will either make the world smile or we will make the world walk endless miles just to realize where it wants to be is actually based on where the being finds itself to be. I searched for, I wanted to figure out what God was. And it was a riddle. And when I was young, I really liked puzzles and stuff, you know, chess and puzzles. And the reason was because it seemed like a door that hadn't ever been opened. And so that's what takes you out of karma, a sort of realization of the true nature of yourself, which in some sense cannot be just comprehended based on your memory, but requires a certain ability to realize that a cruel mind and a cruel approach has no other option than to experience a cruel outcome. It's as if the world is not permitted to be anything different. I want to share a story about the fascination of what the mind is. There are two imperial guards who all day they just have to stand in front of the palace entrance. One of these guards gets, bored midday, nothing's happening, looks at the other guard, and both of them are looking at a flag on this long flagpole. One of the soldiers looks at his friends and says, "Hey man, you see that flag that's moving in the wind? That's moving. It's the wind that's moving it, you know?" And then, and so they are arguing nonstop until, surprisingly, this wise sage has decided after many years to enter town, you know? And this sage comes into town. And as it comes into town, these two guards see the sage, run up to the sage, and they're like, "Oh, kind sir, tell us, is the flag moving? Is the wind moving the flag, or is the flag moving?" And so this is where, again, the moral of the story shows itself, where the sage looks at these two guys and he says, "Neither." And both the imperial guards get shocked. And they say, "What do you mean?" And he says, "It is the mind that is moving." And so to study the mind is an advanced initiative. It is a mature soul that wants to understand what the soul is. And what I mean by that is it is an intelligent being that values not just the intelligence possessed, but the intelligence that will be revealed if the exploration of knowledge is sincerely done. You must in some sense surrender your ideology to the magnitude of your present moment and become humbled by how life is so big that a lot of our problems seem small, but what one thinks is small could be a high rise for an ant. Self-realization is the only path. You must see something you haven't seen before. You must experience something you haven't experienced before. You must realize life is a film where every moment you're directing what everything you see means to you. It happens so swiftly thanks to the blessing of this biologically evolved intelligence. But to live for life means that you got to understand you live for life. You do not end. Trees may be cut down, but never the planet. Individuals can become cruel, but never the collective. We don't have time for cruelty, violence, agitation. So as you change your universal view, as the context to yourself acknowledges the concept being as meaningful as it is present, we are no longer discussing whether if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one to hear it, did the tree fall or not. We have reached a point where we are realizing we have to abandon the inferior technology of thought and in some sense individuality, and to realize that in our commonality we are the freedom. how can I say this? It's like, all right, let's end off this live stream. I'm going to leave you off with this last quote by this ancient Sufi mystic poet named Rumi. It's about his search for truth and clarity. And he says, what does he say exactly? Let me remember the quote. He says, I lived on the edge of insanity, wanting to know reasons, on the lip of insanity, wanting to know reasons, knocking on a door. It opens. I was knocking from the inside. It's the same thing with karma and all the complexity of the challenges that life brings you, that at times the situation, the outcome of the situation can change if your gaze does, if your viewpoint does. And your viewpoint changes as much as your universal viewpoint has. This talk has served you. Much blessings and namaste.